yourselves and talk about what you did on this amazing show. Whoever wants to start.
All right. Hi, I'm Matt Youngberg. I am the showrunner, co-executive producer person, and yeah.
My name is Frank Angones. My job was to make Matt's life more difficult.
Hi, I'm Sean Jimenez. I'm the art director through development, first and second season.
Hi, I'm Valerie Schwarz. I was a background designer, then lead background designer, then assistant art director for third season.
Hi, I'm Jason Zurek. I was a board artist on season 1 and then a director on seasons 2 and 3.
Hi, I'm Suzanna Olson. I was a producer through development and the series.
My name's Tanner Johnson. I was a director I was a storyboard artist for the first half of season 1, then director for the rest of the series, and I did as little as possible.
It showed.
So, where did DuckTales come from? I mean, was everybody a fan of the original?
Did you not watch TV in the 80s?
I have watched TV in the 80s, but did you? I mean, was this something that was a passion project for everybody, or, was it an assignment? People can get, assigned these things, so.
Yeah, I'd say for, a lot of us, it was a passion project. Definitely for me, if anyone has watched cartoons, I've worked on a lot of cartoons, big franchises, and I was kind of not wanting to do any other franchise except when anyone asked, I was like, I would love to do DuckTales. I would love to reboot DuckTales, but that would never happen. And then somehow it did happen. And so, yeah, I think a lot of us are coming from the place of big fans growing up, and then also a lot of people that we converted to fans who didn't grow up with it. I hope we converted them. If not, they never showed it. They always seem to love working on the show.
Yeah, I mean, the genesis kind of our version of DuckTales was in our meeting for the very first time. I had been a massive fan of the original DuckTales. The lyrics of the theme song were in my wedding vows. My wife had not agreed to that, but she graciously accepted. And it was this thing where I had known that Disney wanted to reboot DuckTales for a while, and that was because at one point Target told them that the old DuckTales t-shirts were the #1 selling t-shirts at Target. So they should make a new one so they could sell more t-shirts. And that goes to show you, if you love something, buy the shirt. But it was one of these things. I was rolling off of a show called Wander Over Yonder that I'd done with Craig McCrack. Thank you. Craig, are you here? Oh. And they were just kind of, when you're rolling off a show, a lot of executives come to your office and say, hey, is there anything you're interested in? And I knew that there was no way I was going to get DuckTales. It was too big a thing. But I went to my old storage unit and pulled all of my old DuckTales stuff from when I was a kid and put it all up on the wall of my office right by the exit. And then when the execs were like, hey, you want to come have coffee? I was like, yeah, meet me at my office. So it was the last thing they saw as they were leaving. And they're like, oh, do you like DuckTales? I'm like, oh, are you planning on rebooting DuckTales? Oh, that's crazy. Yeah. It's like, well, we have this guy who's going to be a real albatross around your neck already attached. His name's Matt Youngberg. If you should meet him and see if you could beat him in a fight. And I couldn't.
Now you can.
No. I never would. Oh, that's growth. That's character growth. And we just had an initial meeting that went from like a kind of meet and greet right before Comic-Con that year. And I had never gotten along that well with someone creatively in my life. Like, we just kept going back and forth and bouncing off of ideas. And then I said, let's get rid of 2 of the 3 triplets. And Matt said, no! And that is the definition of our working relationship. But
True story. He did say that.
I did say that it was a decent idea. After directing 70 episodes with 13 characters each, maybe we cut 2 characters out every now and then.
It would have been a lot easier.
And I was wrapping up Gravity Falls, so doing those. Oh, they've heard of it. Doing those, very easy finale episodes, but also looking ahead to my future. And they gave me a couple of options of like, here's what's in development. I was like, Ducktales. That's the only one. So I was fortunate enough to interview with Matt, and the rest is history. And then I was like, we need an art director. Sean, texted you a bunch.
Yeah, and then I came in relatively soon after you guys had met. They had already been developing like core ideas for the story. And I didn't know what to expect, obviously. Suzanna reached out to me, and an exec, Shane Prigmore, reached out to me to talk about like meet the team that we're thinking about making DuckTales with. And so I did, and just like what Frank is saying, there was already, like, the minute I walked in, it took like maybe a few minutes to be like, oh, I love riffing off these 2. There's just a real, and that's like a real sign that, oh, if you're going to be in the trenches with somebody for years, like if you feel like there's a chemistry kind of there from the outset. As I had, I come off of Gravity Falls as well, and was in development for a little while and worked on a few development projects. And then that's when this opportunity came up. And it was when I met these 2 that I was like, I feel like there's something here. The most important thing, for me at least, was I liked the show. I liked the original series, but I wasn't as much of a fan of that as I was of the Carl Barks comics. And the thing that made me fall in love, and after I fell in love with these guys really quickly, in that meeting they said, we're actually going to go more to the core of like the entire existence of Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck. We're going to go to the source. We want to look more to Carl Barks for like story ideas in tone and emotion, but then kind of bring in this family dynamic that's like, and actually dynamic storytelling, which we feel like was new. Like I think it's important to say, like, from like Gravity Falls into other shows, and especially on DuckTales, everybody was aware that there was this opportunity for TV storytelling to become more complex, dynamic. The audiences could track characters and story arcs beautifully well. And that was what these guys were telling me. And so I was like, okay, it's, A, they're great people. B, I'm really excited about the potential of what that could be. And C, they love the Carl Barks comics. Maybe there's a solution in the art style that harkens back to the comics. And I won't say anything more because I feel like we could talk more
talk more.
Or maybe there's just a progression from that idea. So we met. These guys were already established the fact that the characters were the dynamic of the 3, right? Frank, you guys were saying like they're not going to be like the original series where they're all the same character. These are going to be very distinctive characters. And this was already like the first meeting that we were like talking about all this stuff. So I went home really, really fast. And I got out, I had a bunch of Carl Barks comics, and I like laid them out, and I'm like, all of this is like, we don't know what it's going to look like at all. And I'm looking at the comics, and another artist that they had mentioned was Hergé, the French comic artist Hergé of Tintin comics. And there's sort of that really spoke to me too, because those are like very complex stories. And so I love Tintin, so I had the Tintin comics out, and I'm just like staring at them, looking at them, and I don't know like what to do exactly. I'm just kind of trying to figure out what to do, and the first thing I thought was like, well, maybe it's just like, if they're gonna harken back to Carl Barks, maybe the look of the show should just look like a comic book, And coming off of Gravity and other shows, I'll just kind of lay this out. I promise I'll let other people speak. I promise. But another thing that happened is after I talked to them, I had a conversation with the head of the studio, the production head of the studio. And they came to me and they said, if you take this job as art director, you have to understand a lot of shows are really behind schedule. And we know that the scope of the storytelling is really big on DuckTales. Like, there's a big family. They're going to go on adventures all around the world. They're going to probably go back in time and go into other universes by the second season. And if you take this on, you have to help get this show made on time and on budget. It was like a threat. It was like a threat. And I was like, okay. And so I came off of this great meeting with these guys, and then I have a meeting with them, and I don't know what to do. And so that's when I started realizing, like, oh, wow, that's interesting. You know, a lot of the current cartoons at the time were being rendered like painterly. Beautiful, right? They're beautiful rendered effects with, like, filmic lighting and everything. Just so everyone knows, like, that's one of the reasons why shows get behind schedule and cost tons of money. And so when I was looking at the comics, I was like, what if it's like hidden in plain sight? What if it's economical like a comic? Maybe we use comic book techniques like Carl Barks made his comics. This is the most natural progression from the stories to it. And mind you, I'll put this out there, this was before Into the Spider-Verse. It was like really fresh and interesting. It was like an interesting idea. Oh, it could look very different than the standard Photoshop painterly effect. And I'll stop there for now.
Well, I was going to ask sort of what was the biggest challenge, either getting the show off the ground or during production. Logistically, I mean, the show is so massive. There's so many characters, so many plot lines, and you introduced this kind of Disney afternoon universe that everyone loved. What was the biggest kind of hurdle?
The beaks.
Really?
Yeah.
Specifically from below.
You guys don't want to see a beak from below. It's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the art direction, the beaks is like that. He jokes, but it is really true. That was one of the first things we decided we needed to tackle. Was like, these things are so hard to draw, in general. They almost never look good in animation unless you have like master animators working on it. And so we looked at master animators. We looked specifically at like Milk Call and some of the Nine Old Men and how they drew the beaks, and we adopted a lot of those techniques into ours, and then made a formula for them. That was a really fun thing. But in terms of scope and stuff, I mean, it was every episode was a different kind of challenge. Mm-hmm. And the problem is we never stopped challenging ourselves. Episode 4 was like one of the biggest challenges ever, but it was the Mount Everest, which we kind of did this whole new art direction type of thing in it, and the snow and the effects and everything was really, really hard. And then from there, then we ended up having space battles in the moon and all these kind of, so it never got smaller. So that's probably the biggest challenge. It never really got smaller.
But I will say, from that perspective, we were incredibly lucky to have Suzanna on board, because Suzanna is one of the finest producers I've ever worked with. She not only backed up the vision, she also made sure that we had the leeway to enact the vision. And sometimes when a director puts DJ Khaled's All I Do Is Win in an animatic, and it's fun for the room when we're pitching it, right? Oh, yeah, it's a funny joke. We're obviously not going to use it. And Suzanna sees how it plays. It's like, I think I can find the money to make this work. So if nothing else, that is Suzanna's legacy, is getting DJ Khaled on the Disney Channel.
I was going to say the biggest challenge was hiring the right people, which we've got Tanner and Jason and Val here, and I think every hire we were really, really intentional, and it only got better as the seasons went on.
I will say from a writing standpoint, in terms of the challenge, and piggybacking off of what Sean said, you know, we wanted to, there was so much DuckTales. Like, there's so much Scrooge stuff, and everybody has a different version of what they think DuckTales is, right? Is it the 87 show? Is it the Barks comics? Is it the Rosa comics? Is it the video game? Is it all this other stuff? Trying to meld all that, and then the dual asks, you know, because Gravity had been so successful, so they were starting to get on board with, like, what if we did do a larger narrative, continuity-heavy story, you know, bigger story arcs that could harken back to the comics. And then at the same time, but also, what if it was a self-contained, could rewatch in any order, fun family kids show just about kids, where Scrooge is the sidekick.
And every 6 months it went back and forth.
And it was trying to balance it. So that was, you know, one thing that in those early meetings, because we knew that was the ask, right? It's like, how do you do a continuity-heavy show that can be repeated in any order and viewed out of order? And that was one of the things we came up. We made up a term to make ourselves sound smart, which was self-contained serialization, which was the idea was really hearkening back not just to Barks comics, but also we talked a lot about Chris Claremont X-Men comics, and how in the 80s, if you picked up a Claremont X-Men comic, there was very little chance you would know what the hell was going on, because you picked it up at a spinner rack and you would have to search for the one before, and you may never see the one after. So that book had to have everything you needed in it to enjoy that story individually. But if you somehow managed to track down all the other books, then it told a bigger, complete story. And, you know, sometimes we were more successful at that than others, but that was, I think, from a writing standpoint, the biggest challenge.
Did you make Disney nervous at all with some of these big swings?
I mean, we're making them nervous right now on this panel.
Live on Twitch, yes.
I don't think so. I will say Disney was always, I mean, I think Disney kind of looked at our crew that was made up of people who were 50% so incredibly excited, couldn't believe they got to work on DuckTales, and so incredibly terrified that they were going to mess up DuckTales. They were like, well, you guys seem like you really care about it, so I guess it's right. I guess that's, I mean, there were little things along the way, you know, in terms of casting and asks and little kind of like, you know, they weighed in, but they were always very supportive. You know, when we said, oh, by the way, Don Carnage is in this, and so is Gummy Bear Juice, and also the entire Darkwing Duck world is in it. They're like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I do want to take a moment to really thank, you know, Eric Coleman, Gary Marsh, and Edward Mejia, Michelle Mazzano, Lisa Salamone in a huge way. All these people who were there at the inception, and then of course the executives who followed, who continued to be like, well, they seem like they know what they're doing. But those, we had some great champions in there that were always very, very supportive of that, and I really always appreciated that.
Well, you're talking about sort of nailing down the characters for this version of the show, and obviously the voice cast helped immensely. And your sort of penchant for, you know, sort of subverting what people might think of in terms of the character and also the voice actor. So I was wondering if you could talk about getting this amazing cast and the amazing guest stars and just how that all came to be.
Jason, you want to field that one? Jason does not want to field that one.
They probably couldn't see my look of fear in the back.
Well, our initial one line, like, you know, you come up with the comps, right? When you pitch a show, it's like this meets this. It's like blah, blah, blah. And our pitch was, it's Indiana Jones meets Arrested Development. Right? It's a dysfunctional family of the world's greatest adventurers, and they're all going to bounce off of each other, and the family is the greatest adventure of all, even though we would never say that. It would be so cheesy to say that. We would never, ever say it. And so our goal was to find actors that sounded natural off of each other. And so I think for the most part, everybody auditioned. Like we were lucky to have just the cachet of DuckTales. Like everybody loved the original series, wanted to be a part of it, you know. So we had people like Ben and Bobby and Danny audition and Beck, and I mean, David, we knew David was the guy who was like our true north. It's like, well, if David is Scrooge, then suddenly you know what the rest of the show is.
Yeah.
There, it was partial. I'm sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
I mean, we had actors telling us that whatever the role is, I want to do it because it's DuckTales. So we kind of did have our pick of some of the funniest people in business, and it was really like Frank said, everyone wanted to audition, everyone wanted to come in and try their hands at it, and it was a really hard process because we had a lot of people who were really, really good, but we also had these very specific ideas for who these characters were. So finding the voice that matched the character. For example, when we talked about Louis, like this, he's a con man, but he's really a sweet con man, and what kind of actor is that? And I don't even think Bobby was coming in to read for him.
No, I think he was coming in for Launchpad.
Right, and so
Yeah.
we were like, try this out, and he did.
And he was great as Launchpad. We were like, if we got Bobby as either of these, and then we heard Beck as Launchpad. It's like, well, obviously.
But Launchpad was really hard because Launchpad had such a distinct voice, but he's also such a distinct character. So finding the right type of person for that, who's not just aping a voice, but bringing something of his own to it. And that's kind of what we did for everybody.
Launchpad was the hardest one,
I think.
because that was the one where we didn't know what we wanted because Terry McGovern had done such an incredible, indelible job in the original series, and we knew that we didn't just want to do an impression of that. So that was the one was like, I guess we'll know it when we hear it. That was one. That was a hard one. Darkwing was a hard one, but that's
Dewey
just
was a
because
hard
I have an issue. Dewey was a hard one, but that was different.
Yeah.
Because Dewey was an entire. I will say that part of the joy of having this cast of amazing improvisers, and that was to the earlier point, to have them feel like a family. A lot of times we had to record people separately. It's very rare these days that actors can record together. So we were lucky to have a lot of people who had big ensemble comedy experience and also improv experience. So they had the capability to always sound like they were actually in the room with somebody. It was never just about selling a joke, it was about selling the interplay between characters, even when they were recorded months and months apart. Dewey was initially way more of a chip on his shoulder. I've been watching too much Gilmore Girls when I wrote that pilot, and he was way more of the Milo Ventimiglia, like, I'm a tough guy who doesn't fit in. Forget you, old man. And it worked, but he wasn't anyone's favorite character in the pilot. And then Ben came in and auditioned, and he said, I like this guy, I want to do this guy. And it was revelatory. Like, it was, oh, he's a theater kid. I know what that's like. And I went home and rewrote the entire pilot to really ben up Dewey.
Yeah.
So it was a lovely collaboration in that way.
Was there anybody you wanted that you couldn't get?
I will say that we did. Sometimes yes, but then it led to other things. We had really, really, really wanted Diana Rigg from Game of Thrones and the original Avengers series and James Bond to play Black Heron as a nod to Beakley's 60s swinging spy pass. And she was going to, and she was just unfortunately too old at the time. And she was coming in and apologized profusely, was so excited to do it. And then because of that, we had to, we're like, okay, well, we have to recast this. And casting suggested Catherine Tate. And at the same time, we were having a real heck of a time finding a Magica. And we didn't even think that Catherine Tate was available to us. And we're like, wait, no. Catherine Tate is Magica. And then I had worked with April Winchell on a show called Wander Over Yonder. I'm just gonna buzz market Wander Over Yonder. I swear I don't get Disney Plus residuals. Watch Kid Cosmic on Netflix. But April came in and did this amazing Judi Dench, and it was really funny because it happened a bunch on the show where we would have an actor who the character popped so hard, was just so funny. He's like, well, we have to bring this character back. We ended up, by the end of season 3, having an embarrassment of riches. It's like, well, we've got to put Gibbous in the finale, right? That was an interesting. Again, it was a blessing that April then came in, so that when we got her back in, she was so good in that season 1 episode. She's got to be a main member of Fowl. And we played the voice for April, and April said, "That's not me. I don't have a Judi Dench." she figured it out.
Well, was the idea to bring in other Disney afternoon characters there from the beginning? Was that part of okay, so when they were saying the kind of overarching universe, that's what they were talking about? Or was that something that you guys proposed?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I like to, I'm going to speak for Frank on this one, because I always kind of guessed that the long con was getting Darkwing Duck into DuckTales. Like, that was the whole point. Like, he loves DuckTales, but he loved Darkwing Duck. So he definitely was, that was the long game. But in addition, when we went in, we knew we wanted to put a lot of that stuff because we loved all of that stuff. And yeah, I mean, there's dreams, maybe you can do spin-offs, but really, if you can pack it all in, get as much in there as you can, you'll still be happy, and that's kind of what we did. So from the very beginning, we went into a legal meeting, like our first meeting with legal, and we said...
So you know, when you have a series, a lot of time when it's an original series, you have this like kind of perfunctory meeting with the legal department where it's like, hey, my main character is Joe Gambons, and he
Let me write that down.
right, yeah, and he's a real mean guy. So that you don't get sued by a guy who's named Joe Gambonston. Like they have to clear all the names. But when it's an IP, it's like, okay, we just have to clear all the names, and et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we said, all right, so here's what we want. And we kind of listed all the Disney Afternoon, like all of the classic characters. Like it was like we want to put in as much as we can.
What's that?
Powerline, yeah, Powerline.
Yeah.
I think. So yeah, we really shot the moon, and like I think they only said no to 1 or 2, but mostly it was like, yeah, sure.
There
all
was
yours.
Gummy Bears couldn't appear in.
Yeah.
That was we could have Gummy Berry Juice, but
And
not Gummy
Wuzzles
Bears.
Couldn't say the word.
You couldn't
or
say the word
name.
Wuzzles because again, it's like it's one of these things where like, oh well, there's someone that Disney half owns the rights to, or and those were like toy companies or whatever. And then Bonkers, they didn't want to put in because they were like, well, we don't know who owns the rights to Bonkers. I was like, you do. You created Bonkers because you didn't own the rights to Roger Rabbit. The point of Bonkers is you don't have the rights to another guy.
Yeah, so the lawyers came into this meeting thinking, oh, thank goodness, it's DuckTales, we know we have the rights, and then they're provided this 30, 40, name long, all these IPs that already existed, and their faces just sunk. And it took probably about 4 months for them to run all those names and figure it out. And then there were some that, in the 80s shows, it's all on paper, so they had to literally go back to vaults and dig out old contracts. So, we were the favorite of the legal department from the beginning.
For sure. I will say that part of just as to why we wanted to bring, as opposed to the how, was going off of the notion that this is like playing, the best TV shows are like playing with your toys when you were a kid. And when I watched the Disney Afternoon as a kid and I saw Launchpad show up in Darkwing, it blew my mind, right? And then you'd have Glomgold show up in something else, and you'd have, Pete show up in the background of something else. And it just it got to that MCU, places how do we figure this out? How this could very easily be a shared universe thing using Scrooge as kind of the impetus, right? We always said Scrooge is our Iron Man, and you can cobble together a team of other people from that, and that kind of became the meta text of Last Adventure. It was oh, this all started from Scrooge McDuck, because it did. It started, the Disney Afternoon started from Scrooge McDuck. Without the success of the original DuckTales, none of these other things would have happened. And, the notion of Donald Duck as a popular character started with Scrooge McDuck, really, in the Barks comics. And so, yeah.
Was it hard to kind of subvert those characters too? Because every time one would show up, it would totally undercut your, knowledge or understanding of that character or whatever. So was that a challenge? Even in the design of some of them too, if you want to speak to that, yeah.
The design was a huge thing.
Yeah, design definitely, Darkwing was a big one.
Okay.
Trying to figure out the Darkwing design, how you update it, how you don't update it, and conceptually the whole concept that Frank had also come up with the movie and then the new character coming out of the movie, all that kind of stuff was able to give birth to this change in his look, which was great. But, fitting him into our universe, and I think for all of the Disney Afternoon stuff, just fitting in those styles into our universe, it was a challenge. But, luckily we had a really great art director and team who was able to take that and we had really great formulas and brains behind it. So here's a brain.
Yeah, and I think our character lead, Tim Owen, and Tapan Gandhi, were a team that really understood.
Sarah Craig too.
And Sarah Craig as well. Is sort of equivalent to the writing. There's sort of I always called it it's kind of postmodern. You kind of have to have it's you're taking it and you care about the original design, just like these guys cared about the original storytelling. But you have to throw a spin on it. And you have to be very careful. It's kind of a razor's edge. You push it too far, it starts feeling like you're making fun of it or something, right? If you push it too close to the original, then everyone's gonna get mad at you for all the purists will get mad at you. So you're kind of darned if you do and darned if you don't. So it takes a certain artist to really look at it and because they care about the source material and just gut their way through tweaking it in a way that gives it kind of a freshness to it. I think that's sort of what was common throughout the whole series. That's kind of what we were doing. It's actually very difficult to do. So they deserve lots of credit for that, and when it comes to the character designs, because that's what they were masters at doing it, really incredible. And they were a great team of people too. And there's more than that, but I would say, it was Tim and Tapan that really we trusted them. It's kind of what Suzanna said, they made it easy for Matt and I because we casted really great artists. So we just had to give them sort of loose prompts and be careful and then let them go at it. And they always brought back incredible results. So, and then after a few episodes, again, that chemistry kicks in and then there's a flow. And that flow is incredible feeling when you're working on it because everyone's kind of on the same page somehow. And you can't, it's all in the cast. I got you back to echoing what Suzanna said, it was all in the casting of the people. And that's how that got kind of handled.
I was going to say there's also, of course, we all love DuckTales, but there's so many sub-loves on the show. I mean, Tanner wrote the Tailspin episode, has a lot of love for that. So he brought some of that new spin on it.
Yeah, co-wrote with Colleen Evanson, who's amazing. That was a thing where when I came on to DuckTales initially, I was on a show that I really liked working on called Justice League Action. Watch it on HBO Max if it's still on there. I don't know. But I actually told the showrunner, I was like, I'm never leaving this show unless they do, I don't know, a DuckTales reboot. and I got a call from Matt halfway through the second season, and I was like, hey, remember that thing I told you? Well, it happened. Anyway, no, but I love DuckTales, but I loved all the Disney Afternoon, but in particular, Tailspin was a passion of mine, and I always wanted to take a crack at it. And it was funny because working on the show, that was when I discovered that it was that apparently the original was a period show, it took place in a specific era, and I was told well, no, because it takes place in the 40s or took place in the past, and then I just basically took all my love for Tailspin and was able to find an entry point into that. But it was because, like Frank said, it was because of my love for DuckTales that I was able to, get into Tailspin and then really be into that and help have a once in a lifetime chance to take a crack at it. So.
Yeah, Tanner had the same passion for Tailspin, and he had just one thing that I'll say about the directors on our show. One thing I'll say about every creative on our show that really frustrates me is that they are so much better at my job than I am at theirs. Because every single one of them brought, from Tanner, speaking about Tanner and his take on Kit, which I thought was just so stinking smart. Like, yeah, if you were a kid who grew up with Baloo as your father figure, this is who you would turn into, 100%. A lot of people's like, but he was noble and kind and whatever. It's like, yeah, and then he became a teenager. But the one of the joys in the writer's room, and the writers were all game. I just want to shout out Colleen Evanson, Madison Bateman, Christian McGallis, Bob Snow, Ben Simon, Megan Gonzalez, Tony Campanella. Everybody in that writer's room knew the directors and their board teams personally and so well. And so they would get excited about the chance to write an episode in tandem with these people. And one of the joys of Tanner's thing is you knew he was going to deliver an amazing character piece. Like he had such a good brain for, and I'm not to say anything about all of his other amazing talents, but he was so when we had Della come back, it's like, that's a Tanner piece. Like, are you kidding me? Lost mom in space? Like that, coming back, meeting your kids? Like, that's a Tanner piece. When we were going to do Astro Boy, like, are you kidding? We're going to do an anime Astro Boy, homage featuring with a robot fight. It's like, it has to be Jason. Like, and he's going to deliver both on the spectacle, but also on that epic pathos of that episode. What was the question?
I don't know.
I was going to comment, though, that, like, on this show, the writers and the story team were not siloed at all. Every episode was really, really collaborative. And it was really something really fresh to be able to work in that kind of environment. And that's a testament to, everybody up here, that kind of environment was fostered and encouraged. And like, I still count so many people on the crew. All of them are like bare minimum, like, oh yeah, that's like my cousin. It's like family, which I know is like counting coworkers as family is unhealthy. I get it, but no, like there was like
I'm an only child. Be my brother, Tanner.
I had to establish boundaries with Frank. No, Frank and I shared a wall, and there were just a lot of, I guess it would be called pranks, but HR would call it bullying.
But nonsensical pranks.
Yeah, no,
like
it's
truly.
true.
It
was chaos. Yeah.
Can I talk about the one thing?
Yes. Please.
I decided for some reason, I don't know if anyone knows Chris Nee, who created Doc McStuffins and Vampirella and amazing shows. And fantastic creative. And there was just all of this Chris Nee stuff around. Like there were like posters of her face from various events that they had done promoting Doc and all those, and I found them. And I decided that Tanner was Chris Nee's biggest fan. And so every day there would be some new piece of Chris Nee memorabilia. And when she went to Netflix, I sent Tanner a text saying, I'm sorry in this trying time. That's not bullying.
Whether it was
that's
true or not,
supporting your love
true.
of Chris
So,
Nee.
Listen, I should be so lucky as to have the career path of the career arc of Chris Nee.
As we are nearing the end of this conversation,
Are you
let's
serious?
talk. Well,
Oh, no!
we got 15 minutes left, but let's start talking about the end of the show, and let's talk about, was it always planned for 3 seasons? I know how difficult these shows are, and this one must have absolutely killed all of you, but was it always planned for 3 seasons? Did you say, maybe if they like it, we can come and do something else? Take me through the thought process, the emotional journey that you went on.
Well, you're going to need a panel with my therapist.
I feel statements.
I'll go back to a thing. What was Buddy System? Was that episode 6, 12, season 1? Beware the Buddy System with the Gizmo Duck and introducing Darkwing as a TV show within the world, and et cetera. And again, our biggest champion, I can't say enough nice things about Edward Mejia. Edward gave us the notice, like, you're only like 10 in, and you're already putting in Gizmo Duck and Darkwing and all this other stuff. That didn't happen until much later in the original run. I was like, well, Edward, the original run had a guarantee of 100 episodes. I have a guarantee of 20. And it was one of those things where I'd learned do it while you can, because otherwise you may not get the chance to do it. And so we had an end game in mind. The whole Webby backstory, spoilers for anyone who knows. The whole Webby backstory had been from the very beginning, like from the inception. We knew that was end game. And then we put it in a little box with a piece of glass that said, in case of cancellation, break glass. And so when we found out that season 3 was going to be the last season, it was like, all right, how are we going to execute this where we are, trying your best to know that you don't have all the control in the world, but knowing that we really needed to get that Webby story out. We really wanted to get that Launchpad story out. Sometimes I forgot that, and that's why Negaduck forever lives in a sewer. But that's where he belongs. But it was one of those things where we found out that season 3 was going to be the last season, and we broke that to the crew in a meeting, and everyone got real sad. And Suzanna had the presence of mind, is like, okay, but in this meeting where you tell them that this is it, tell them how we're going out. And so I pitched the entire crew the story for Last Adventure, and suddenly it became less about we got to finish this, and it's so sad, and we got to find, and everybody had this intense sense of ownership. I remember Kat, are you here? Yeah, I see Kat right over there. Amazing Kat Kazmala is one of the animators on the show. Yeah. Kat Kazmala came up to me after that. Was like, really? Scrooge's daughter? I don't know about that. And I was like, oh, no. And then slowly over like a couple of weeks, Kat was like, I've been thinking about it, Frank. I think it's actually right. I was like, great, that's fantastic. Like, it gave me relief, right? Because by the end of the series, it was less about trying to pay tribute to the original series, and it was more about trying to pay tribute to this family that we had collected along the way.
And then we had Val finishing out the art side of the series, which is its own feat.
Yeah, Sean bailed just when it got hard.
Yeah, so it got really hard second season, so I took off. I was like, forget these guys. I had my reasons, and it was very, very difficult. But when I went to Matt and talked to him about it, I even gave him the, like, hey, I'll stay on even if it kills me, like, because I love you and the crew so much in the show. And he understood my reasons. It's something that I will put out there that could happen to art directors on heavy-duty shows. There's sometimes a shelf life because of all sorts of external reasons, like schedules and all the things that I said early on. And so we had a conversation, and Matt was really gracious and said, well, only, I'll be okay if you step away, as long as we could find someone to take the helm, like grab the steering wheel. And we talked about it, and there was talk about from like outside of our team, like bringing in an experienced art director to take on a show that is already 2 seasons in. But we felt like the best person to take on the role was Valerie Schwarz, who's sitting next to me, because It was, can I set you up a little bit, Val? Yeah, so when Val first, we found Val at Cal Arts, like she was still a student at Cal Arts, and we were looking for, potential artists to come onto the show when we were staffing up first season. And so we brought Val on, and she was this incredible, like, not only is she a talent, I mean, I say this all the time, like, the talent part is, like, I always use, like, baseball analogies. Like, you got to have talent just to play the game, but it's really, like, your intelligence towards storytelling and production. And we would talk about it being kind of like production IQ. You need to have a production IQ. Suzanna and I talked about that all the time. And even though Suzanna was, basically agreeing with me that we had to, like, talk to Val about it. And there was a 1 minute concern that she was a little bit younger, and we put that to rest immediately, from the executives, that wasn't, that didn't matter, is that she was in the trenches with us for 2 full seasons. And she was really my right-hand person through all those 2 seasons, and we just watched her develop and grow to the point where we felt confident that she could take the helm of a big old TV show so I could leave. So that's why Val took on the 3rd season and really ushered that show to completion, especially with the giant finale. Now I'll give it over to Val.
Thank you. I'm very honored. Thank you so much. It's so sweet. Yeah, the 3rd season, I mean, it was like jumping just straight into it and learning so much just while going through it. And I learned like so much from Sean, like just so much. Like, like my whole career is like thanks to Sean. Like, he's an incredible boss and mentor. And yeah, it's a tough show. It was an ambitious show, and especially that 3rd season, like we went all over the place, which was really fun though, because it was like getting to like know a style so well, and then just keep delving into all these new locations and places and characters. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was really, really fun.
Val, I'm going to take over for a second. I wanted to ask you a question. How did your approach differ from Sean's coming in terms of, because Sean, if you don't know, and Laura Leganza, who unfortunately could not be here today, was famous for returning all of Sean's thousands of research books to the Disney library. So Sean was very research heavy, but you, having come up from the series, how did you approach each new, especially that very globetrotting heavy 3rd season?
Oh yeah, no, I was a lot like Sean, honestly. Like, I would also go to the research library. I think there's still a stack of like 20 books in my office that never got cleared out, never returned. Yeah, that was like the coolest part, was like getting to do all that research and work with the librarians, because they would just pull so many cool books. Like that resource was like incredible. Yeah, I remember just like the 1st season just delving into just like Scottish interiors and architecture and furniture and studying that and pulling all that information. It was really cool, so we kept that up. But yeah, I feel like my approach is very similar to Sean's. It's like a people-first mentality and just making sure like the crew feels supported and like healthy and able to make art while not feeling like under pressure or like, yeah, I think that's the best approach. But yeah. And then the art is also good too, so that helps.
Can we talk about the construction of the finale? Because it really is outrageously ambitious. And to me, it felt like, it was so satisfying that it was like, what more do you need? Like, yeah, we only have 3 seasons, but we're giving you so much.
A movie.
Truly. 3 episodes long, the finale? Yeah. And they aired it, I think, in that big chunk, too, on Disney Channel sometimes. So, yeah, can you talk about what that was like, putting that together, and, what the kind of goal was?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, because we kind of, from inception, you can read about it in the lovely Art of Ducktales book that we are ostensibly here promoting. Thank you, Kim Bloom. We had a structure for episodes that kind of mirrored onto a traditional film structure. The Save the Cat 3-act structure for each episode. And then for the 1st season finale, we had the 2-parter, the Shadow War. And that was the other thing. Shadow War was so stinking big. And then And then the Moonvasion was bigger, and now we're closing out the series possibly forever. So how do you go bigger than that? And it was more about, one thing that we really wanted to do is, so structurally Moonvasion was 2 separate episodes of television. Or not, excuse me, Shadow War was 2 separate episodes of television. Moonvasion was structured as 1 longer episode of television, you know, and instead of doing like 2 separate setups. And then that one is, we're going to approach this fully as a movie and treat each episode as a first act, second act, third act structure. But also trying to pay off as much as humanly possible. There were some characters, unfortunately, that we had wanted to get in there. At one point, Negaduck was going to be in Foul. At one point, Penumbra was going to be on the rating team. I'm sorry, Sam. But the thing that mattered was making sure that we were going through to the core of the story, which was about family and finding that family. And that family is not necessarily the people you're related to, it's the people that you fight alongside, right? And fight for you and love you no matter what. I was always really bummed. To this day, one of my greatest regrets, we had a line in the finale at the very end where Dewey says, where Webby says, I guess I'm part of the family now too. And originally Dewey had said, you already were. And we had to cut that because Ben couldn't nail it, really. That was no, we had to cut it because initially that episode was what, 4 hours long? We had to cut from that episode was a masterpiece segment where it was Dewey's time to shine. It was a dance-off between Dewey and Don Carnage in the egret. In the giant thing, and it was Dewey, and dun, and he outdanced as all the other kids like pull an Empire Strikes Back around the egret's legs, and it was such a fantastic thing. It wasn't even that it was too long; it was too long for the part that it was in, because that was the other challenge. Is it wasn't just that the whole thing had to be 66 minutes. It was that each individual part of it had to clock in at 22 minutes.
Right.
So that was like a lot of math.
We did have to take some of that episode and put it into my episode.
Into the second episode.
Sorry, we had to take some of the head off of the third episode and put it into the second episode, which is the one I directed.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And there was an incredible that fight between Scrooge and Bradford, with that Humps had boarded the heck out of. Matt Humphreys, our third director, was fantastic. And it was like the premise of like a fight in the Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse where they were using all of these mythological props. And at the end of the day, it's like no matter how cool something is, no matter how big it is, you have to give room for the story to breathe. And ultimately, it was a story about Webby. It was a story about family. It was a story about Huey uncovering this giant conspiracy.
The last thing, the approach we took. Like each season kind of had its own emotional arc to it a little bit. And the first season delivered on this really amazing emotional arc in the finale. Even though it was this really big Shadow War type of thing, really it was about Scrooge and his relationship with his family and getting past this secret that has held them back, basically. The second season, we hit the emotional heights kind of middle of the season with the return of Della, and so the second season finale became about more spectacle than emotions almost. Like it definitely had emotional arc to it, but the spectacle was what we leaned into it. That's why we went huge with the space battle and all of that kind of stuff. The third season was like, okay, now we've got the emotional spectacle and the physical spectacle, and we need to do both of them. And so luckily we did have that extra 22 minutes to do that with. So it became the longest of our finales, the biggest in terms of characters. There was the scope was insane. Every single character almost that we've ever came up with was in the show or had been introduced in original DuckTales or the Disney Afternoon. All of them were in there.
Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, that was fine. I mean, it all worked out because here we are. And then the challenge of the set design too was like that was our biggest set that we had ever created for the entirety of the series. I think.
Meetings upon meetings with all of the writers and all of the directors, and Val like shouldering an incredible amount of work to figure out how this Lost Library of Alexandria that was going to be 3 episodes or 2 episodes worth of action work. And that was one of the benefits that I'll say in working with Sean and also working with Val is the writers always worked in tandem with the art directors when writing, and they would do these amazing layouts that we could write towards. And it's so liberating to write an action set piece when you know what the set looks like.
And let me throw in that, and that isn't normal, actually. Often something about the boilerplate processes at the studios tend to, we say, put the cart before the horse, where that the story would often be done in a vacuum with incredible writers. And then the art, the development of the art would happen after the fact. And it was Matt and Frank and Suzanna basically they first had to allow it to happen. It wasn't like assumed that was going to happen. We had to talk about it. I actually had to sign, I kid you not, I had to sign contractually that I wasn't going to take, want to take credit because I was let in on the story room. Like the story bullpen is sort of a sacred space that you can't just willy-nilly walk in and out of.
And there's no reason it has to be.
Yeah, and there really isn't. And we proved it wrong, that process wrong in that respect, because they let me in, and Matt and I got to look at it. I would call it, my contribution, I always would say, I'm not trying to, write, I'm not trying to be a writer. I'm just trying to think of the visual concepts that support the storytelling. And I had to work with Suzanna to build a schedule where and not just running the art department, I had to spend ample amounts of time with Matt and the writers in the writer's room when probably art directors should just be working in post or working with the team. So we figured out a process where we were able to do it. And I started doing it, and then Val did it in the 3rd season, where it was in the schedule that we would work on development on an episode months ahead of when the artwork had to actually be generated by the team.
And then Sean started hiding in the writer's room when he was behind schedule. And
then it was
where the producers knew. He was like, shh, don't tell them that I'm here.
It was so fun. It was so fun. Do you blame me? When you get to the nucleus of the storytelling and you're watching it happen in the room in front of you, it's you get a real buzz off of it. So, and they were the writers and Matt and Frank were so welcoming. I would hide. I would
literally lay down on the couch and try to get away from Laura and I.
I would put the couch covers I'd put over me and lie flat, just so that if Laura stuck her head in, she wouldn't see me, but I was there. And I would take my breaks hanging out with the writers, because it was such a wonderful experience to be a part of that. But yeah, just to say that, the reason why we're mentioning it is because it usually doesn't happen that way.
And you get to have people like Tanner write an episode. You get to have people like Sam King write an episode. You get to have people like, Sam King, you're here?
Sam King's here!
Sam King's here! You get to have Emmy Cicierega write an episode. And you also get to bring people up. You get people like Jason Riker directing an episode under Jason Zurek's direction. You get everybody has the opportunity to grow, and that was one of the things that hopefully I think. Oh, sorry, and Stephanie Gonzaga guest directed an episode. It became a thing that hopefully was top down from Matt and my collaboration, which was just a level of respect between writing and artists that, again, this is my soapbox, and I feel like everyone who's talked to me in the past 5 years, there is no reason that a writer cannot talk to an artist. There is no reason that an artist should feel awkward about talking to a writer.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about the show is there was kind of this learning laboratory feel to it. We tried to, like Frank said, we tried to present opportunities from within that board artists would have opportunities to co-direct, that directors would have opportunities to co-write, that, you know, just, I mean, me becoming a director, I owe so much to both Dana Terrace and John Oshima for putting kind of that, they vouched for me, and I was able to get that position because of them and that like vouching. And it was everybody just trying to help everybody else up. Revisionists got promoted to board artists got promoted to directing. And it was, and again, all credit goes to, you know, Suzanna, Matt, and Frank for fostering that kind of environment.
Yeah, I always have a real problem with this philosophy. You know, there are people who are threatened by other talent, you know, threatened by other writers, threatened by other artists, all, you know, that they're going to take my job, or they're going to, you know, that whatever, I don't know what it is, but
Or it's
it
even a more
exists.
primal thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm not as good as them. And
Yeah, whatever it is, it's like, and it's a philosophy I just can't get into, and I'm always pushing for people to learn and grow in the places they are, because they are going to take over. You know, somebody doesn't last, you know, Sean didn't last the entire 3 seasons on the show. So, like,
why are you the scapegoat? We had people leave like 4 episodes in. It's like, I can't do this.
but
You
because
made
he's
Sean
here.
do Invasion.
Because he's right here. But this is
No offense.
He's a perfect example. And you know, you have artists who are always finding promotions, because if you're doing your job the right way, they're going to get promoted. At least for me. Like, if I'm doing my job the right way, the people all the way down the line are going to be promoted, whether it's within my show or outside of the show. And I never want to get in the way of them succeeding. And so if they're a storyboard artist and they get a directing job on another show and another studio, I'm always like 100% behind them, because I don't want them to miss out on something, even though it's going to be really hard for us to replace them. And it was really hard, but it was always worth it, because the person has an opportunity to grow, because that's how I grew. I grew because people allowed me to grow. And I am always grateful for that. And I always want to keep that as my ethos when I'm working.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, I will say to that, I'm sorry, I have to spend time gushing about Matt Youngberg. It's not my favorite thing to do. He did not have to listen to me even one lick. Like, he had been hired on as the EP originally, and Matt fought for me to have a producer credit. He fought for me to have equal say in that. Like, the crew and the respect and the love that everybody fostered for came from that. You know, and so thank you, Matt, because I don't think anybody on this panel would be where they were right now without your belief in us. So.
This is true, all true.
We are about to throw it to the audience, but I just wanted to ask before we do, you know, we don't have a 4th season, but we have this great book. And this book is not put out by Disney Publishing. This is a Dark Horse publication. So are you guys, how did this come about? Was it just fighting to get this out, or what happened?
Frank, like,
I can, so, there was a Twitter thread. You guys remember Twitter, right? Before that, yeah. See y'all on Mastodon or Tribal, whatever we all decide on. There was a Twitter thread that I had done called Rewrite History to drum up recognition for our show getting put in the correct order on Disney+. And I just went episode by episode. And it was really, I mean, it was early pandemic days too, so I just needed some, I was coping with rolling off of Ducktales and a society dooming pandemic. And I coped by taking 4 hours of my life every day to remember every single episode of Ducktales and start writing, like, and finding the right GIFs and finding the right images. And I started posting them. And I got contacted by Ken Plume, who had followed me on various social media. And he said, like, hey, I wrote the Venture Brothers book. I love your show. And what you're doing on that thread seems like there could be a market for that. And this was before I think it was announced that we were wrapping up. I think it was all that kind of stuff. And it was really Ken Plume who put it all together. Like, he championed this book. Like, he took it to Dark Horse. He got all the approvals. He had a larger book. He weathered the paper shortage of the pandemic. I don't know if people know that that's a thing. And just endless notes and hours and hours, like about 300 hours of interviews, I think he did with everybody. And so the book is a testament to Ken's love of Ken!
Hi, Ken.
Don't let
Hey,
him ask
Ken.
any questions. I'm done with you, Ken. You've asked too many.
I also feel like even early on, working on the show, I would see Sean would get these binders that would organize the art of each episode, so that each episode had this like monstrous binder, and I would walk by
Over
them.
500 pieces of art inside of 6 weeks for every single episode.
And they were also organized so beautifully, and it really scratched that awesome itch for me of just like, oh, all of these episodes and the art for each one of them. And it was just, I think Sean's OCD like really helped it make it more feasible to make a book, I imagine.
I
right?
mean,
Like-
truly, once Ken met Sean, there was no way this book wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Because that's the thing that happened next is once Ken met up with Frank, then Frank reached out to me and said, see Ken. And so Ken and I had coffee. He's from the East Coast, and he was over in LA, and we had coffee. And then we talked about the book. And, I'm pretty, like, I used to say to everyone on Ducktales, like, we're never going to get an art book made, so don't try to make art for an art book. Make art for the show that the audience could enjoy, because a certain tendency could come of this thing that happens to artists when they know that there's like art books available because the features put them out. Some studios put them out, but Disney doesn't customarily or at all put them out. So I knew that as a fact. And so when Ken was talking to me about it, I didn't believe him. I didn't believe him. I don't even believe him now. Like, the book exists. Like, I'm looking at it in your hands, and I totally don't believe that it exists.
Every now and then a thing comes out, and we're like, still? Like, Epcot still? Really? Cool. Fantastic.
And really what happened, when it comes to the art of book and Ken is I just had a blast working with Ken. And this is, we're not joking, like hundreds of hours, right, Ken? Like, getting on Zoom and going through the art and looking through the art and curating it. And then we brought Suzanna and Laura in. We had to bring people to help support to like find the art, because in today's day and age, all the art's digital, right? And so it gets kind of like art.
Except for all of Sean's notebooks, which we had to ship to Dark
So
Horse
yeah,
to get
so
scanned.
I'm like this old curmudgeonly person who loves to do my thumbnail sketches like on sketchbooks. And I had these like kind of throwaway, they're not nice sketchbooks, they're like little pads of newsprint. But they helped me, they were almost like my production diary, because obviously chronologically I'm working on an episode. I would like write notes and I would date it. And so that's how I would track it. And I would never pull the pages out, because I think deep down inside I really wished that one day there would be an art of book, but I never thought it would happen. And then lo and behold, Ken comes around and we get this thing made. And I had to ship, by the time that I had the 2 seasons worth, the sketchbooks are, I think it's like this tall. It's like dozens and dozens of sketchbooks. And really I had a blast with Ken, because that's what we use to like kind of guide us through what you guys will see in the book in a way. And then we worked together and did it, and they like literally, we shipped the sketchbooks out. So all the like crappy doodles that you see that you can't really tell because they're really lightly colored pencil, those are like the art director's napkin sketches that are like the concept of what the writers and Matt and I were talking about in the writers' rooms. And then those would become the little guide, the little compass guides to the rest of the beautiful art that would get made by the team, right? So that's how it kind of went down. It was just sort of really fun. It allowed me and the team to look back on the show. And that's really why we got the book made, and it was Ken that spearheaded it. So the fact that it exists is really a triumph. And we're hoping that people love the book, and hopefully it starts, like people going like, hey, we want more art of books for other shows at Disney.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, and it was, we all put our heart and soul into this series, and then it was really like therapy to be able to relive these stories. Oftentimes we try to Zoom together and talk over each other and tell the story from different points of view, and then eventually Ken probably found it more conducive to just talk to us individually. But it's truly something special to have been on a show like this, but now have like a hard-bound copy of all our stories and memories.
And the book is, the wild thing is it's not even just an art book. Like, it's all the stories from the artists, but also from the creatives, from the producers, from, again, the magic from the cast, all of the magic that was present in this crew is kind of represented in that book, in the totality of every department coming together. Also, if you get the deluxe edition, the last page is the manila envelope story. And if you know what that is, you know why that's a big deal. It's a delight. It's an inside joke between Bobby, Ben, and David Tennant that has gone on till this day. So stuff like that is all in the book too. So it's a joy.
All right, we're going to throw it out to you guys and also people on Twitch, right? So anybody in the room, front row, yellow shirt.
So if Target wanted the show to make T-shirts, why did he get more merchandise?
This is a question about what I will repeat the question for everybody watching at home, that if Target wanted more merchandise, why wasn't there more DuckTales merchandise?
There was actually,
There was a brief window of time.
for comparison's sake, there was a ton of DuckTales merchandise compared to some of the other shows. Like, it's not a given when you have an animated show. It's funny, like, they generally don't, until it becomes a massive hit and runs hundreds of seasons, they generally don't even begin to. So the fact that they talked to us about, there was the Fat Mojo action figure line, there was kids stuff, the plushies, like, this book, you know what I mean? Like, we recognize that we were very lucky in that aspect. Would I like to see more? Yes, of course. Do I want to see Della Duck merchandise on every ding-dang shelf in America? Yeah, of course, because she's my favorite. But, yeah. So there was, but temper your expectations.
So this is a Twitch question, which is, what was the funniest thing to happen behind the scenes? Tanner's got an answer.
I do have an answer because, well, one, it's hard to narrow it down to any particular event because very funny people interacting all the time, a lot of comedy. But the thing that jumps to my mind, and this will get Jason involved, is we screened the episode, the golf episode. See, got it. I got the right one. And we were screening the animatic for the golf episode, and we reached the part, the coin toss part, and Jason?
Do you want to explain the coin toss?
No, well, you gave it to me sooner than I expected.
Sorry.
So I will say, to tee you up a little bit, so I think you were pretty new on to the show, right?
It was my first episode. Yeah. It was the flattest shot. Humphreys gives me all the credit, and I was just like, you want a wide shot? You want this completely uninterrupted? You don't want me to like cut back? And he's like, nope, wide shot. I'm like, okay, this is extremely easy to do, but it's a credit. It is all the writing. It is all the voice acting. I got all of the credit for this. A guy in the screening started laughing so hard he had to leave the room.
We had to stop the screening because it was buried in laughter. Because at first we were laughing at the incredibly funny joke, but then we were laughing because I believe it was John Garcia. Was it John? John Ramirez. I'm sorry. John Ramirez could not stop laughing
and we were all laughing at the fact that he couldn't stop laughing. And so we tried to soldier on for another like minute or so, and John had to excuse himself. We all had to kind of refocus, and then we rewound it and then played the rest of it. But that was probably the funniest.
I was still on not probation, but like I was on like the temporary hire status at the time, and then I get called in and they're like, yeah, we're gonna hire you. Like, you can so thanks to that guy for like collapsing from laughter during one of my sequences, because it got me a job.
They did after that, I think, ask for the crews to stop laughing so hard because there's a weird thing where like sometimes crews will laugh really hard at jokes that maybe might not make it to convince executives that blah, blah. That was not the case here.
Me laughing at every gyro joke that gets cut.
Gyro Gear Loose, the greatest character in all of fiction.
And then we all dressed up as Sean on his final day.
Right.
Yeah. He didn't know what was going on until he realized all these people had beards who didn't usually have beards.
I didn't think it was funny. I was like touched by it. Yeah, everyone dressed, because how you see me right now is just how I look every day. And so with a Dodger cap and a beard, and the whole crew dressed up like me when I was leaving. And it was kind of the act that told me that it was okay that I bailed on them second season.
No, Sean, we dressed up at you so it would be like staring in a mirror of your own guilt. I'm sorry you misinterpreted what that was about.
Let's get another question from here. Let's go back, right back there. Yes, sir.
Hi, so what was the process like about getting the movie for the video game, and was Capcom involved at all?
Okay,
Suzanna?
this is a question for about the video. What is it? The music from the video game in the show.
Yes, anything, including the Disney properties, which we referenced, had to be licensed. So we had to go through our music department. They got a quote. It's interesting. There's a lot of like money changing hands within Disney, but it was a fantastic opportunity to liaise with them, and we did get the approval. And gosh, we needed to, because a big part of Frank's plan for the series revolved around that song. So thank God it all worked out.
Well, it was look, how many shows from the 80s have not just one iconic song attached to them, but two? Sean had never heard it before we started, and once he heard it in season 1, he started lobbying to replace the Ducktales theme
I wanted it to
with
replace
the Moon
the theme.
because it's the most indelible piece
Iconic.
You can find on YouTube like the orchestra versions of it, and it's like the most amazing thing.
His second choice was the end credits to be replaced.
Yeah. Compromise, come on.
Yeah. But it goes back to that thing of, everybody has a different version of DuckTales, and that video game it was the first video game I ever beat. I was in kindergarten. It was, it had an iconic place, and that song has such an iconic place. So to tie it to Della, to have that be the last little bit of the end of season 1 felt like it was adding something important while saying something about the show in general. We're taking everything. It all counts. It's all part of it.
Let's get another question from in here. Sir, with the mask on. Yep, go ahead.
Episode 1 was probably a really good character introduction to the main trio, the various characteristics, worrying about ties and the boat and everything. I was actually curious, as writers, how do you go about the process of character introduction?
It's a question about character introduction.
It's the hardest thing, because in order to introduce a character, you should know. Well, it depends, right? If it's a character like Gyro Gear Loose, you have to have a great entrance for him. So he kicks open a door and says, "Shut up, everyone! I've done something brilliant," and that's the character, right? Because you know what the core of that character is. You have to know everything about that character to introduce them in the proper way. Whereas sometimes, you get a character like Penumbra or Gibbous. Gibbous is the main, he's the main example that I always use. Gibbous, from the moon was just so stinking funny. And Rob Paulson's performance was so, like, he's a legend for a bunch of reasons, but Rob Paulson's, it was one of those things where sometimes you didn't even realize you were writing a character introduction until you like, oh, that's fantastic. But in terms of like, it's about knowing what the core of that character is, knowing what that character's want is, and what their main mode of working through the world is, and how they're going to interact with other people. The murder board was a big part of it. The murder board was homaged in the show as Webby's like big conspiracy board, but it was a thing that Matt and I had developed right off the bat, which was how every character in the DuckTales world relates to one another and what their main core attributes were. And that always served as a true north. And then also, like, you want to, like, yes, you want to introduce Launchpad while crashing, right? You want to introduce bonkers getting abused? I don't know. The bonkers, I am upset. We did cut a bonkers monologue because, again, they were worried we didn't own bonkers. We owned bonkers, but it was a very long. He was actually the chief of police of St. Canard, and he was giving a speech at a podium. And it was such a long bit. It was like he comes and he's got note cards and he scans the crowd. If you ever see Christian Megalis in real life, he was a writer and he would do this. It's my favorite video from that time. He checks the crowd, checks the cards, thinks about what he's going to say, and then throws them out and says, "We're all going to die!" So, you know.
And I think also one of the big things for when you're looking at characters is, and it referenced in the murder board, is it's not how much you tell the audience about them, because that doesn't matter because they'll get to know them. It's how they interact with the other characters. I think that's like the biggest thing when you're writing characters is I don't care, what their job is. I don't care, what they were like as a child. I mean, that all informs them, but when you're writing the character and you're giving the character to an audience, it's about how they interact with the other characters. I think that's one, because that's where their personalities will come out. That's the kind of.
And by the way, that murder board that they're talking about is in the book.
It is.
And the story of it is.
Art of DuckTales, currently available.
Buy it.
We get no money from that. Isn't it crazy how much we talk about it? That's how much we like each other.
Here's a Twitch question. What was it like working with Tony and Selmo? And I'm going to ask, where did the Don Cheadle of it also come in?
I will address the Don Cheadle one first.
Okay.
The Don Cheadle one was, we had this idea for the Barksian modulator, right? Because famously, Donald is a massive comic book star worldwide. And the great thing about being a comic book star is everyone can read everything you're saying and understand it perfectly. And so that was the version of Donald that we were and we had to meld that version of Donald with the media version of Donald, which is, was Clarence Ducky Nash initially, and then Tony Anselmo actually starting from the original DuckTales. And we wanted to have a version of that Carl Barks hard-bitten adventurer Donald, and we went to, I think the exact words were, we want him to be the biggest badass you've ever heard. And we told our amazing casting team, the casting team at Disney Television Animation, one of the best in the business, we said, get us an Avenger. And Ben Schwarz says, I know an Avenger. And he texted, if I got it right, he didn't text Don Cheadle, he texted Don Cheadle's son, because that is how you convince Don Cheadle to do something. In terms of dealing with Tony, I mean, this was a real challenge for Tony. Like, we were asking him to carry more of an emotional, we looked at it as like what DuckTales is to Donald, Goofy movie was to Goofy, right? Is like dimensionalizing that character, making him a fully rounded family man. And what Tony does is it's really, I mean, it's a skill. It's not a performance, it's an instrument. Like it is, like you see him and it's pushing, you start to think about what is the nature of the voice? And he's pushing air out of his lungs. It's like, and moving his mouth around to approximate speech. But it's not speech. So then on top of that, to ask him to also emote and to, and there were a ton of learning curves. Like, there's all these rules that ultimately end up getting thrown out the window because it depends on the day. It's like, because he's like a giant bagpipe. It really is. It's like trying to get Peter Frampton's guitar to act, and he rose to the occasion through, I have to put a ton of respect on Sam Riegel, who also was he was our voice director on the show, and he guided us through that entire process. And we eventually learned how to best execute Donald, and it was always challenging for Tony. It was always challenging for Tony to live up to our expectations because we both had such high bars for the character, right? And Tony is a perfectionist. And, I will say that it shows on the screen. I mean, hopefully everybody loves our version of Donald. I would love to see our version of Donald a little more often instead of the reactive Donald that you tend to get. Yeah.
Let's get another question in here. Let's go to the front row, right here.
I wanted to ask, I really want to go into animation myself, and I want to just thank you very quickly. Your guys' show saved my life in 2018. Before I get to my question, which is, what was the moment in any point in your guys' career when you realized this is what you wanted to do?
It's a question about when you realized you wanted to be an animator or showrunner or whatever role you fill on this panel.
Well, I mean, it was a process, but I always loved to draw. Like that was the key for me, was always loving to draw. But then DuckTales was one of those things that set me on this path of like, there's stories that you can tell in animation that you can't tell in other places. And then I remember specifically going to see Great Mouse Detective as a kid and being like, wow, this really is my kind of movie. Oh, really? But I'm speaking the right person.
You have excellent taste.
Yeah, you have excellent. And then as I got older, then Beauty and the Beast came out, and it got nominated for an Academy Award. I was like, wow, this is a really legitimate art form that people can get into. And so, and then you work in it, it's like, it's less legitimate than you think. But no, I always loved being able, I think what it was for me was being able to combine my love of drawing and art and things like that with my love of storytelling, but then you even get a heap on other things, acting and music and all of these things. It all comes in one package that you don't find anywhere else, and so that was kind of put me on my path a little bit.
Yeah, it just dawned on me that the best definition of our show is it's a DuckTales reboot made by a bunch of Great Mouse Detective people.
As one of maybe two people on this
I'll
who can't draw, there's
I'll
also...
throw in. Yeah, I'll throw in. It was, I was 12 years old. I knew I wanted to get into it. I didn't know specifically what, I think I wanted to be an animator. And it was The Illusion of Life, the book The Illusion of Life, that was written by the 9 Old Men. I grew up in Southern California, so I was always like in the shadow of the business. And there's, a lot of these animators were actually accessible, like the Golden Age animators. When I was coming up and was pretty young, like they were still alive. So it started with The Illusion of Life when I was 12. I bought it at Disneyland. My mom bought it for me at Disneyland. She was like so mad because it was like $30. She's like, oh my God, why don't you just get like a stuffed Mickey Mouse stuffed animal? Why do you want a big giant book you got to lug around on like Pirates of the Caribbean? And but it was available at Disneyland. I bought it, and I just used to draw. I didn't read it because I was a little kid. I just drew, I just kept drawing from that book. And then as I got older, I realized that was kind of the tome of like animation. You could actually learn from it. And then it just kind of started from there. And then as I got older and I got into the business, and then like what Matt is saying, you start realizing that there's all of these other attributes to the process of making it that you fall in love with. So it always started with drawing, but then it expanded out. And and to this day, I mean, for some of us, like Matt, and it was like 25 years of like being in the industry, and I'm kid you not, I still love it. It's hard, and there's a lot of you know, you leave shows end of second season, and you do all of these things, but you love it, like you love it as a fan at the beginning, and then as you're inside of it, you start loving it as like a creator, a maker of it, or being part of it. And so, yes, come to animation. Come with us. Yeah.
But don't despair if you cannot draw. There's a lot of people who find themselves in animation through unique ways.
Absolutely.
So there's the organizational sides of y'all, maybe the production routes for you.
And of course, the humble writer. Get your way in there.
No, how dare you? How dare you all? No, I share Suzanna's, you know, I knew I wanted to be in animation. I was a live action writer. I worked on a couple things, and I did a freelance on a show with Craig McCracken and Lauren Faust, and it was the first day. It was an episode of television called The Epic Quest of Unfathomable Difficulty, which is, in fact, the definition of working in animation. But it was the most fun I had ever had. But I will say, again, to all animation writers, it's like, oh, this is great. You can do whatever you want, blah, blah, blah. And I had this, I had a confrontation, not confrontation, I had a teacher in Dave Thomas who was working on, as director, not the owner of Wendy's, who was directing on Wander Over Yonder, where he essentially had called me out on like, hey, you can't, like, what you write, we have to draw. And it took you about 2 minutes to write a sentence, and it was the reason I couldn't see my kids this weekend. And I went in and I said, look, you are better at your job than I am at mine. I want to collaborate with you to figure out how I can be better at my job. And I think that's the goal. If you're a writer who wants to get into animation, is you respect the people making it. You have to, you know, communicate with them as much as humanly possible, and recognize that it's a collaborative. It is fundamental, unless you're like making Thief and the Cobbler, right? It is a fundamentally collaborative medium.
And now's my turn to toot your horn.
No.
Because you got to toot mine. So Frank is this rare, very rare instance of someone who's a writer who loves animation and wants to work in animation. There's a lot of writers who kind of see it as a stepping stone, or like a thing to do to get paid, but they really want to do live action. But Frank loves animation, and he came into it, like he said, like he was writing live action, and he came and he's like, this is the most fun I've had. And you know, all of his loves that we talk about from growing up and everything is a love from animation. And not only does he love the animation, but he loves the process of animation. He loves to work with us, and it's just a beautiful thing. And Frank is amazing, and he is somebody who is better than 99% of the live action writers, the people who don't even want to touch animation. Animation is a hard business to be in as a writer, and so to be there with you in the trenches is it's a wonderful thing to have a writer who wants to be there with you.
And when we were working on the book with Ken, you know, we were talking to Frank about it, and he said, well, maybe one day there'll be an art of book for the writing, and the title of it will be The Pictures Get in the Way. The art of animation writing.
Speaking of Ken Plume, we have a comment from him from Twitch, and this is directed at you, Frank. How could you get the timeline so wrong? We're going to have to do a making of the making of book.
Making of the Making of Ducktales, available on Amazon.com. November 2040, 59, maybe? I don't know. Sorry, Ken. That's why you're the historian.
Let's
right
get
at
another question from in here. So how did you craft characters that were beloved, but also make them new for this version of DuckTales?
Oh, you're talking about Doofus.
Here is the thing about Doofus. I'm sorry, I'm go up.
I'm sorry.
The thing about Doofus, Susanna's favorite character, is that was easily the biggest departure we made, easily, from the original series. And I was very nervous about it. And I did hundreds of internet searches to see if people cared about Doofus, to see if like there was like an underground like cult of gadget type, like we love Doofus, he's my favorite character. Because again, and I'll say to everyone in this audience and everyone listening at home, like we were so aware that this was a huge undertaking and we were being given a lot of trust and leeway, and we wanted to do right by the fans, and the fans have done enormously right by us, so thank you all. But I searched, there's like nothing. I couldn't even find like fan art, which is crazy. If there was a fictional character, if there's an IP, it has fan art. Couldn't find anything. I was like, okay, I think we can change Doofus after a lot of work. And then as soon as that episode premieres, I can't believe they ruined Doofus, my favorite character in all of literature. But more sincerely to your point, the thing that we always did is like there were these reasons that we knew these characters. You're taking the iconic, we always used to say it's finding the three-dimensional reasons for why iconic characters act the way that they do. You know, we all know that Donald has a short temper and flies off the handle. Our question was, well, why is that? It's like, oh, well, according to this backstory, he's risk averse and he's afraid of something bad happening to his three nephews who he's ostensibly the father to, because something terrible happened to their mom, his sister, you know, and it's just kind of building back from that. Scrooge is, you know, Don Rosa did an amazing job of cementing Scrooge loving treasure, not just because he's greedy, but because every treasure is a memory of some adventure that he had in his life, and he really values adventure. And, you know, the twin loves of adventure and family became the push and pull of that character. You know, Huey, Dewey, and Louie are classic troublemakers, and so we said, well, why are they troublemakers? Yeah, it all kind of worked backwards from there.
Let's get another question from in here. Sir, the hat? Yep. Yes, you.
First of all, I just want to say thank you. Your show is the reason why I got into the Duck comics.
Oh, man.
I love your shirt, by the way.
Thank you. It's Don Rosa.
Yeah, it's the Rosa family tree.
Cool. Yeah. My question is, if you were to make a DuckTales movie, like an actual feature-length DuckTales movie, what would it be about?
Ooh, good question. Wow. If you could make a DuckTales feature, what would it be about?
We have had so many conversations about that.
I have a feeling Scrooge is going to be part of it.
Yep, I like that.
The nephews? Okay. No, that's a good question. It is. We told a lot of stories over 3 seasons, and we definitely, before we knew for sure that we were done with 3 seasons, we had started brainstorming a 4th season. Like, what could we do in a 4th season? So we definitely still have ideas that we could explore. The thing to translate a TV show to a movie, though, is you always have to find a story and an adventure big enough to bring it to the big screen. You know, because I know I've seen a lot of shows that go to movies and it doesn't feel big enough. It feels like just an episode of that show. And so any idea we would come up with needs to be bigger, needs to be, but also emotionally bigger, story bigger. So it's tough. It's a tough thing because we put a lot into this show.
But basically, Matt's saying if we find the financing, you know, never say never.
Yeah. If there's any extremely wealthy person out there who wants to...
Does anyone want to buy Donald Duck for us?
That is the last question. We want to thank all of our amazing panelists. They are going to take a quick break and then be back to sign your books. So stay in your seat. Your seat is going to be they're going to call you row by row. So just stay put. And they'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you guys so much for coming out.
Thank you.